Sheesh. Coming up on Truck Dog Road, we install an Auxbeam 8 gang switch as well as a 41-inch 200-watt amber LED light bar on our 95 F350.
Truck Dog Road, where the miles don't end. Just a man and his mud, the highway bends. Through the hills, through the rain, through the joy, through the pain. Truck Dog Road, where we find our name.
For today's project, we're gonna have to make some brackets. There just isn't a whole lot of bracketry kind of items available for these trucks anymore. And what we need to do is start setting up this guy. This is a switch assembly for all of the aftermarket stuff that we're gonna be doing. And we need to find a place for it to be able to mount right in this space here. So we're gonna be, this relay will be moved. That's for our electric fuel pump right now. And this is going to mount flat here. And then we're gonna be putting, because there's gonna be another relay I need to install. The relays will face this side. And then we also need to find a spot for this guy. So just taking some measurements here. Gonna start doing some drawings here to try to get an idea of the shape and how low we need to sit. And then we'll start making something. But the goal is to get all of this to mount to the already existing holes here from this bracket, because it's not going to be a lot of weight. So these 2 points, those 2 points, and that will have to come out and then drop down so that we're facing something like that. That'll make sure that this is accessible, and it has to face flat because that's how everything plugs in right here. And all the wires come up and will fit into all of these little doohickeys here. And then that will make sure that if we blow a fuse, we can change out the fuses. But more importantly, that makes sure that water can't get in here. Where if it's long ways like this, you know, we'll be seeping water in there. So, plus I like this because it's just easier to work on if something blows, and it's easier to install because we've got some toys that we need to plug into here. What I'm thinking is that we plug in, this is the controller, comes with a bunch of like little stickers that you can basically plug in on these, and we're gonna mount this about there-ish, somewhere in here. That way it's accessible, it clears everything, and these plastic bezels you can still find online, so I'm not like all that hurt about beating this thing up. I still have to take it apart to see if I can actually have space behind here. I'm pretty sure I do. But I really like that spot. Plus it clears the gear shifter, the column shifter here as it goes down into drive and first, it clears that. So I think I really like that space. If not, we may have to figure something else out. I don't know if we mount it somewhere there or somewhere down here, but it needs to be away from the feet. So this is gonna control that pod I was just showing you so that we can put on lights and accessories and whatever. But we also have to mount this guy, and we need to make a bracket where this bracket currently sits. That's actually for a CB radio that I just never finished installing. So we're also going to be making a bracket that goes along that edge so that we can mount not only the CB, but so that we can mount this guy. This is going to control our airbags on the rear, both left and right independently. So yeah, the first step is to get that module installed because that's going to be most crucial for everything else. Then we'll start working on getting this guy installed. Then we'll make the brackets for this guy, and then we can go into the rear of the frame and start drilling holes to get the airbags installed. So we got quite a bit of work still. Okay, so we're gonna begin with a just plain Jane 8x8 square. I measured a little bit over because we need to be able to bend this in like 2 or 3 different pieces. So that's why I'm taking such a small piece as well, to see if we actually can. It's only 16 gauge, so we should be able to use a couple pliers and things like that, and maybe some boards to try to bend at about this mark here. We need to be at about 3 inches. So that's about where we're gonna have to try to bend it. Once we're done cutting this out, and we actually, if we're able to bend this over to about a 90-degree angle, We're then going to need to take out a little bit of a rectangle here of some material. That way we can bend these two pieces, because if you remember, that slot isn't perfectly square against the truck body. One is square and the other one's kind of tilted out, and we need to be able to bolt to both of those. So let me grab my little tool over there with the battery and we'll begin cutting this. Next thing that we need to do is we need to measure 3 inches from the side, and it's not perfect, guys, but I mean, it's fine. We're using what we got. So we're gonna measure 3 inches, and it's an 8x8 square, so it doesn't really matter which side we use. But we're gonna measure 3 inches, and that's going to be the line that we attempt to make the bend at. So I tried to give myself a little more leeway here with how much material that we shaved off here, but once we get that bend, then we can take out some material here and it'll kind of look like a fork. So it's not perfect, but one thing we can do when we put it up there is start bending it to the direction that we want it. Something like that. I think that's going to work, but let's go ahead and take that relay off. Okay, to illustrate what I'm doing here is you can kind of see where this bend is here, and that's just going to be kind of a pain to be able to work around that. So what I'm going to do is I'm kind of eyeballing it here, and we're going to take out that material from this point to about that point, and we're only going to drop it to about right there. So we're going to take out that square, actually maybe a little further, maybe about there. That way I can move this bend and this bend independent from one another so that we could get it to sit in there just a little bit more flush. Also, I'm gonna have to take off quite a bit of material on this side. I apparently just didn't measure right, but if we put this guy like that, you can kind of see what we're after here. Okay, so now you can kind of see what I'm talking about here, where this has to be at much less of an angle than this side here. Okay, so all I did here is basically take an outline of this shape, and now what we need to know is how much space behind this line we need to cut. So it's roughly going to be 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so I think I've decided to do something a little bit different here. So instead of cutting this line, I think I'm actually going to bend it down. That would give us a surface area to be able to tap in to mount the relays, or potentially even the fuse that comes along with this kit. Plus, it would eliminate a sharp edge from where wires are going to be touching. So we basically kind of need to make an S here. So I think that's what I'm going to do instead. Draw a line through here, bend it down, and see if that gives us enough space to work in there. Now before we get too carried away, let's go make sure that this is actually going to work. Okay, we're getting pretty close here. So what I need to do is get this bent kind of forward and then back so it can be a little more flush. And you can see I kind of had to lop off that corner so that it rolls with the body. I may have to lop off a bit more, but for right now, I think what we need to do is bend this more that way so that we can bend it back so we could start marking holes to drill. Okay, so I think I got us in a good place. We've got the corner here kind of taken off so that it fits next to the bed a little bit better. And we have the rough shape that we're going to need for the weird side. Now, it looks kind of janky now, right? It's, again, we're just using what we have, guys. I've got nothing but hand tools. I've got a very small welder to be able to use here, but we're just using what we have, okay, guys? Kind of hard to see, but that's where our pre-existing holes are-ish. And then I was digging through our my dad's, he's got a bucket full of nuts and bolts, and we found 2 that are going to fit the pre-existing holes that we have. So Next, what we're going to go ahead and do is drill out these holes a little bit bigger than they probably need to be, because I can always put on some washers. And then we'll go back, I'll mount it hard, we'll finish reshaping this, and then I'll start marking off areas where we may be able to get rid of even more material. I'm not really worried about putting like any bracing or anything under here. It's gonna vibrate. It's a 7.3, guys. It's the motor moves a lot, and it's not holding anything heavy, so really we just need it to be able to hold it out of the way. And then we'll have this drop ledge here where hopefully I'll have enough space where I can actually mount some of the relays and a few things like that. If not, I may end up welding another plate back here, which would give it additional structural support, which it doesn't need. But we may be able to mount it that way as well. So we're going to play around with some things. For now, let me go ahead and get these holes pre-drilled. All right, moment of truth. Time to see if I'm going to be able to make this work with the holes that I made. Okay, so that one we get a lot of leeway, which is good. Okay, so this one's a tad bit crooked, but I can make it work. But that's roughly about how it's going to mount. It's about right there. I'm just going to get a hole right about there. That hole we just made is going to be for this. This is a resettable breaker. So if it pops, you can reset it. Okay, so we've got our part here all painted in Rust-Oleum flat black. Now what we can go ahead and start to do is install it here on the side. And I'm going to start with this side. Then I'll bolt down the left side. Oh yeah, I forgot. I've got grounds here I've got to put on behind here as well. Can't forget that. So we'll get the grounds in this installed, tighten this up like crazy, and then we'll start installing everything that goes onto this bracket here. Oh no, did this die on me? Oh no! I haven't charged this thing in a very long time apparently. Alright, so next we want to wire in our connection to the battery along with our little resettable fuse here. So to do that, I'm going to need to remove our inlet here for our exhaust box, or our intake box here, because the battery actually hides under here. So it's just one bolt, so let me go grab that real quick. Okay, so there's going to be one of these that's longer than the other, which is this one. So this is the guy that we want to try to use first, but now I'm running into a problem. They didn't give us enough of this stuff, so I need to see if I have some more laying around. Well, at another bit of a standstill because they didn't give us enough of this terminal wire here to be able to actually make the connection all the way over. There's just not enough. So I tried looking for some more, but this is the longest piece I have and it doesn't even get us halfway there. So I'm gonna have to order more of this. I tried seeing if I could connect this to the terminal that they got, but I don't have a connector that's a large enough gauge to be able to hold this wire. And we want to play it safe. We're gonna have, you know, anywhere between 60 plus amps running through this, so we need to play it safe. We don't want any of this arcing out. So we're at a bit of a standstill, which is probably fine because I'm gonna have to order more of the ground. The ground actually barely even has enough area to go reach it. The good news is that I don't have to go quite as thick on the gauge. It says here this is, oh, it doesn't say. It says 1 by 10 millimeters squared. I don't know what that is in gauge. I'll have to look that up. But I guess the nice thing is it's not going to be as expensive because we don't need to go to quite this gauge. Okay, so today's challenge is to try to figure out a spot to put our gang switch. Now, this is actually proving to be a little bit more difficult in terms of planning than I initially thought. So let me flip you around here so you can kind of see what I'm after. So this is my normal driving seating position, and I want the gang switch to be reachable. I need to be able to reach it just from standing because it's going to control lights and compressors and stuff like that in the future. So it comes with a few different mounting options. You get this guy, which has the ability to kind of swivel, which is cool. And then we have the option to flush mount it. Now, initially my first plan was to mount it right here. I think that would look awesome. The problem we have is that this is called a bezel, this whole black piece that goes all the way around. It slopes down. So the problem we have is that this is going to slope down like that, and that just doesn't look very good, and then it's also difficult to see the buttons. In addition, it interferes with my keys. And I can't put this guy here because it'd interfere with the keys even more, and then it would interfere with the gear selector here. So as much as I wanted to do it on the right, that's out. I also thought about screwing it to this trim piece that goes onto the bezel and it going right there. The problem is I can't find these very regularly online anymore. They're not made anymore. And these are Eddie Bauer edition trim pieces. And that means that if I break this, which is a possibility, I can't get another one of these. It's very difficult to. You can find them used, but they're not in as good a condition. And if I buy a new one that's just black or whatever, that means I have to replace all of them just to be able to match. So we're not doing that. I also thought about maybe going on the bottom of the climate control trim piece here, because that's a separate piece, and maybe doing something like that. But the goal here is to not drill into anything that's difficult to replace. This is an old truck. It's getting harder and harder to find trim pieces for this stuff. So drilling into anything that's basically this gray color is out of the question, because even if I found a replacement, then I'm having to paint it, and it's never perfectly right? Like all of these were stained and painted at the factory around the same time. So it's not impossible to find them, but it's getting more and more difficult. I also thought about going right here into the fuse panel, but again, finding these things is getting really difficult. In fact, the only piece trim-wise that I'm able to find pretty regularly, even on Amazon, is this actual bezel, because it breaks a lot. So they're all over the place, and it's the same for the Bronco, the Ranger, and like all that stuff. So they're not the Ranger, but the F-150s and the Broncos. So finding that bezel is not difficult at all. So we're basically forced to having to mount it to this bezel. I also thought about mounting it up here, and it would actually look pretty good like that, like up here, but it's a little small for the cab. Like it looks good like that with Jeeps and stuff, but then also while I'm sitting here, the cab is so big that while I'm driving, I actually can't reach it without having to like move forward, and it's just awkward, you know what I mean? I think our best bet right now is to try to mount it like this. It's not going to fit completely flush, meaning it's, you can kind of see how it's going to face down a little bit. And I can't have it go too far up, guys, because you have to be able to remove this piece. Let me show you. So we have to be able to remove these little panel pieces, because that's where the screws are to be able to actually take this bezel off. So if I were to screw into that and put it on here, then I'm not able to get the bezel off because it's interfering with that. And again, we can't connect to this trim piece because they're difficult to find. So I'm kind of in a rock and a hard place. This is actually the flat mount that it came with. And it screws on the back of here, but there's plenty of screw points here for me to just flat mount it and screw it behind it. And it does fit good here without interfering with anything. The steering wheel is going to obstruct the view a little bit, but at least this looks somewhat better. So I think I'm gonna put it at about right there. The problem I have is that it's not sitting flush. Again, this kind of sweeps down and this looks down. So I'm not thrilled with this. I wish I could somehow make it so that it would fit a little more flush, but I think we're just gonna kind of be stuck with doing something like this. Okay, so I've gone ahead and drilled some holes. You can see one there, one here. I need to clean up the plastic just a little bit, but gives you a pretty good idea. And then you can kind of see I got super close to the edge of that plastic that holds in this rubber piece. And then there's one up there, so. There we go. Whew, that was getting frustrating. There we go. I'm also gonna put some double-sided tape on this to keep vibrations down and that kind of thing. So let me go grab some of that. Here's the way it looks. It does face a little further like down than I'd like it to. It's actually kind of parallel with the truck as opposed to being like slightly up, so it's easier for the driver to see. But what I do like about this, let me get my steering wheel adjusted, put that back in park, is that all the lights are now on the left-hand side. So we've got most of the electronics over here. We've got lights pull here, our fuel selector, and then we've got our lights here. So at least it's all on like the same relative area, and it looks better from the outside here than it does when you're actually sitting down. And I guess while the truck started, it's easier to push the buttons while you're, you know, outside, you're doing whatever, and then you can come over here and clicky click away. And I mean, it's on there pretty good. It ain't going anywhere. So now we can begin by putting our trim panels back on. These just kind of clip on like that. Okay, so next we need to start running in the control wire, and this is the kit. So obviously it's going to be easier to roll this side through the firewall instead of this side. So we're going to go ahead and do that. This looks like it might be enough, I hope. This piece we're going to cut off. I used to use this, but we're wiring in so much stuff through the firewall now that it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to bypass that. We're going to go in through this little elbow here. Feed it a bit of slack here. All right, you can see daylight out there, and that's where the cable fed into. Oh, excuse me. Here, so I'm not gonna film this because it's too tight, guys, but you can see we don't have much space to go, so I just need to route it on top of the steering column and this way, and then we'll start zip tying and connecting it. Okay, so next we need to wire in the trigger wire, and I'll show you what everything looks like under the cab here in a second. But this side's gonna go into the controller, and unfortunately they didn't give us enough of this trigger wire, so I had to add stuff. The color's slightly different, so we're gonna have to make sure just to label everything. But all this is going to do is whenever the key is on, it will actually power up the module. So it's just a trigger. So for this one, we're gonna go ahead and start at the module side, and then we'll work in through the firewall. So I'm gonna undo this guy. And you can kind of see what I'm after here. We've got two of these controller deals here. We can unslip that guy. We're going to route this. Well, do I want it through the front or through the rear? I think we're actually going to go through the rear to give us a little more space here. And we just, I think it goes on that way. There it is. And then this basically routes this way. While we're here, we can take the controller end of the cable here, route this underneath, and this connects here. Here we go. Okay, so there's a lot going on here that I'm gonna have to label here at some point. This is my gauge memory power here that's being shared here. This is the actual gauge power. The way I double check this, if you ever forget, is I've got these labeled, but if I unplug this, my dome light, here, I'll do it now. You heard a noise, but also you could see my little dome light here is turned off. So if we go back in here and we plug this back in, you're gonna hear everything turn back on. And then we can come back here and we could see my dome light, or my hood light, and my dome lights actually are back on. So I don't remember what this one is. That's the only thing that has me a little concerned. I think this is dim. So that's dim power, and we can confirm that by plugging this guy back in, which will turn our that will turn our gauges back on. So if I go to turn on the key, you can see my gauges turn back on. That's good. And then if they see how they dim? So if I unplug this, we can see they don't dim. So that's what this is. This is my dim. That's sharing the dimmer switch. So this is the one that we want to use as our trigger wire for our module, since we're already using it. And we're just going to share, again, both of these are trigger wires to get power. And this guy really only needs a few volts just to tell everything when to turn on. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these up, and then we'll splice these both into this little piggyback fuse deal. So normally I don't like using these things, but because I'm still waiting on parts to test it out, and because we have other things that we're going to have to plug into this stuff, I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. I'm going to try using one of these. So the way you do this is you basically just kind of shove it in here, and this is supposed to collapse like that. Huh. It's in there pretty good. It actually clamps it pretty good. I'm actually kind of impressed with that. My previous experience with these is that they were just loose as hell, so maybe it was just the brand. There we go. So now we can shove this back in there and plug this guy back. Now we got to do a test. So I'm gonna label all these, but I'm just kind of putting them here for now. So we've got power to our gauges. We have our gauge memory, which is constant power. And then this bottom one is our dimmer. So what we're doing is we're splicing in to the power that we're already using for our gauges. And that is for, what do we use that for? I think it's number 11. That's like the radio, display, and dim and stuff like that. So this is going into the display. And all we need is a trigger. It's not pulling power from here. It just needs to see voltage to know when to turn on. It's going to be pulling power directly from the battery. So, and it's going to have its own fuse and all that stuff. So that's going to help out a ton. So let's make sure everything still works. I'm going to plug in the keys, and there's our gauges, and we're good. Our gauges turn back on. So now our trigger wire will deliver power. Pretty sweet. And then to show you what I did under here, it's probably going to be kind of hard to see, but those wires are going in from there. And me and my dad built that plate, mostly my dad, but that way I can do this kind of stuff a little easier. And then it comes back over here, and it just routes under here. So I'm going to put some zip ties and stuff in there, but first I need to get my label maker so that we can label all of these, because sometimes I forget what the heck they are. Alrighty guys, so we got this all labeled up. You can see here this says the Auxbeam trigger for, and it also works as my gauges ACC. Each wire is labeled after. We have the dimmer gauge, or the dimmer for the gauges wired in with the spot number, And we did the same thing back here. So everything's labeled so that if I ever have to get in here again, I know what everything is. So without having to remember, or if somebody else has to work on this for whatever reason, they will know exactly what's going on. It's also important to note, guys, I didn't put this in because there's LEDs for most of my lights now, and you have to have this like module deal to work with LEDs. It kind of acts as like a resistor, I think. If you're ever jacking in here and your turn signals stop working, just fiddle with this. Likely while you were in here, you accidentally pulled it out a little bit too much, and you can see that it gets really close to the door. So that's likely what it is. Okay, so we've got the trigger wire installed. We've got the module installed. We're just waiting on parts to actually be able to power it up. But since we're waiting, we might as well hook up something to test it once it is powered up. So one of the big problems that I've had with this truck is that we don't have any fog lights. And that's gotten us into some trouble a little bit. Some of the camping spots that we have to find when it's really dark get a little difficult to see where you're driving, especially when it's pitch black out. So I've seen a lot of people that like to mount headlights inside these little holes. But the problem is that this generation of Ford is actually called an arrow nose. Everybody calls it an OBS, but it's actually called an arrow nose. There's brick nose and arrow nose. And these were put here on purpose to allow additional airflow to get to the coolers here on the bottom. And so the more restriction that you're gonna be putting here, the more you're gonna start overheating things. So instead, we're actually gonna mount a light bar, this guy, here on the bottom. Now this is an amber color, and I've got one of these on my Jeep already, and I love it. I like mixing colors. I don't like just going amber or just like a certain shade of blue or whatever. I actually like mixing the colors because for me, and it might be different for you, I am partially colorblind, but the amber helps me be able to see things like wildlife and signs. So I like the amber a lot more, and our headlights are freaking bright already, so this is just gonna be that much better, and I'll be able to angle it down enough where I'm not blinding people if we need to use it on like a back road. And I love these amber lights. So it's gonna mount just right under here under the bumper. And luckily enough, I think the previous owner already had some kind of a light mounted or something mounted underneath this bumper. So I actually did some pre-measurements, and it looks like the brackets that this light came with are going to fit in those holes perfectly. So we don't even have to measure and drill in the bumper. Now I did have to drill out a hole in the brackets that it came with just so that they're a little bit bigger, but it should not be a problem. So we're gonna go ahead and start mounting these underneath. So you can probably already see the hole in the bolt that I've got in there already. Kind of see it on all sides now, how it looks. All right, check that out. I think that looks pretty good. It doesn't take away too much from the stock look, which is why I like it, and we're not taking up any airflow going through the bumper like we're supposed to. So you definitely still see it a little bit. I wish it was a little bit more hidden than what it is, but I'm happy with it, and I think that's gonna work. All right, so I dropped it in here. This is all by luck, but it came out in that corner. So now what we could do is grab our wire strippers and connect these two ends to the ends over here. Anything that's left in the sun right now for more than just a few minutes, it's absolutely blisteringly hot. All right, put that on. Okay, so we really only need enough wire to be able to connect to one of these terminals here. So I just need to pick a terminal to see which one is which. The way all of this works is each one of these terminals, you get a positive and a negative, is correlated to a button, right? So you've got button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4, blah, 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 all the way down. But you're going to notice that these decrease in amperage, right? This thing can only handle so many amps. So we've got 30 for the first two, 20 for the second, 10 for the third, and 5 for the last. So because this is just a light, I think we're gonna be okay with just doing 20, because I have other plans that I'm not gonna, you guys will see later, planned for positions 1 and 2, and we're gonna need more amperage for those other 2 deals that I'm gonna be installing. So I think this will be okay on position 3. Hopefully you can see the positions there. Finally, our parts arrived. Now, this is actually a much larger gauge of wire than what actually came with the kit, but turns out it was actually cheaper to order a larger gauge than, this is 6 gauge, and the gauge that it came with was like between a 7 and an 8 gauge, really. So we actually went a size bigger for half the cost, actually. So it's only 5 feet, but it's going to be enough of what we need. But what we need to do first is snip on a battery terminal connector on this end first. We're going to work with ground first because it's going to be fastest. The power positive, we actually have to route 2 separate cables because of our breaker, which I'll show you how to do in a sec. So to begin, let's first take off some of the sheath, the little protective cover here. There we go. So to show you here, you really want to make sure that all of the wire is covered to keep it from arcing on anything unnecessarily. Alright, that ain't going nowhere. There we go. Okay, now for you safety bills out there, I've disconnected the positive. We've got a good position on it, we know how we want it to go, but I still needed to route this through where we wanted it, and we still have to cut the end and all that stuff on this side. So let's go ahead, and we're gonna have to use all 5 foot of this on the positive side. We'll plug into the positive side here, and it says there's a stamp on the side, and I read the instructions just in case. So that's negative, that's positive, and it has a red band on it. Next, I'm gonna put this guy on. Okay, so before we can start anything, this is the breaker. It's resettable. It's 60 amps, which is sweet. Okay, we are live. Everything's connected there. Got our batteries connected. Should be able to take the key, and the little controller here should light up. There it is. And so we've got number 3 connected. Here we go, and she's on. We still got to clean up all the wires, but that's pretty sweet. Another thing I want to try to see if we can figure out is what this button does. Oh, so that's everything on or off. Oh, that's cool. It saves memory. Freaking sweet. So we'll pick from a handful of these stickers, and we'll put them on once I'm confirmed at the location that I want them all on. And I don't know what I'm gonna do with the rest of these. I only have 3 planned right now. I don't know about the rest yet, but we've got them now. Okay, so another thing we need to do once we're done here is we need to clean up all of the cables that are kind of coming out from behind here. So all of the cables that are dropping back here, We need to zip tie those, make sure that they're looking nice. But we've got some more stuff we need to install, so I don't think it's worth cleaning it up right now because we're gonna end up having to redo it anyway. But we can make sure that everything else on this side is cleaned up. I just noticed something real quick too. Look, on the bottom of the case, there's more fuses and a little holder. That's the coolest thing. That's nice. That's pretty cool of the company. They didn't give us enough terminal wire. They gave us extra fuses, so we'll let it pass. All right, we're likely gonna have to make some adjustments to the light bar, but so you guys could see it at night. Sheesh. It's pretty bright. That looks pretty good. And the color mixes really well, which is why I like to mix the colors.
He's got grease on his overall, smoke in his hair, boats on the floor and parts everywhere. He don't know the difference in a belt or a chain, but a smile real wide while he wrecks your frame. Oh, bless his heart, it's a sight to see. The village fool trying hard to